Let's continue on with our SQLAlchemy database and try to insert some data. Since we're using models, we'll need to create a session to query our database. We can create a session by using the session maker. So I'm going to scroll down here and create a new session maker. This is what we'll use to create sessions. So I'm going to go session maker, so initializing the object, and then we're going to bind the MySQL engine to this session maker. From there, we'll create a new session. To configure the session maker, we write session maker.configure, and we're going to bind the engine that we set up here with MySQL. Now we're ready to make a session, so we'll write session equals session maker parentheses. So this is accessing our session maker object here and not the original session maker. Now that we have our session, what do sessions actually do? Well, they allow us to work with the database and more specifically, create transactions with the database using SQLAlchemy. As we mentioned before, a transaction is a set of all or nothing queries. We either want all of them to run or none of them to run at all. Ideally, all of the queries run and are successful. But if we need to roll back the changes, we roll them back all in the session. We never leave the database in a half-done state. Let's insert a project into the database. To do this, I'm going to use the project model that we defined in the last lesson. So down here, I'm going to write project, and so creating an instance of this project class, and I'm going to initialize its attributes. So I'm going to make a project. The title is going to be Organized Closet, and I'll give it a description as well. Organized Closet by color and style. We'll save this piece of data that we want to enter into our database inside of a variable. So I'll save that into Organized Closet project. Of course, this only creates the data. It doesn't insert it into our database. In order to actually insert it, we need to use that session object. So I'm going to write session.add, and we're going to add in our data, the Organized Closet project. Pretty easy. It's just like adding to a data structure. Now let's add some tasks to associate with this project. I'm going to create some data with tasks. We're going to put a bunch of tasks in here. Again, using the task model to create this data. Great, so here's our task data. We're using that task model. We input a corresponding project ID, and then we write in a description. We've saved several tasks inside of this list called tasks. Now, this project ID attribute is pretty tricky. In order for this to work, we need to commit the project edition first. We have to do this because auto incrementation of the primary key doesn't happen until after the project has been added to the database. So right now, this is null. Once the project insertion is committed, the database will initialize that project ID attribute. The project object itself will also be updated, so this will no longer be null. Before we commit the addition, project ID is null. Once we commit that project addition, this gets initialized. So we need to commit this project addition with session.commit. This will close that transaction, put it in the database, and then the task additions will be in a different transaction. To put our tasks in the database, we'll write session.bulk save objects and pass it through. This is how you can save multiple things to your database in one line. With that added in, we'll commit the changes, and now it's in our database and ready to go. Now, let's query our session for our project and associated tasks. We just inserted them, so let's retrieve them. The first query is going to select the Organized Closet project. To do this, we'll use that session object. We'll go .query. We'll put in the name of our model. In this case, it's project. And we're going to filter by a specific attribute, in this case, the closet, and we want to retrieve the Organized Closet project. Now, this could come back with lots of results. We know our database, so it'll only come back with one, but we'll just add a dot first so we can have access to that instance. We'll save what this returns in a variable called our project, and we'll print it out for the user to see. For the tasks, we'll just retrieve all the tasks with this session. So we'll go session dot query. We're going to put in our model tasks, and since we don't want to filter by anything, we'll just go dot all. So this will retrieve all of the task data, everything that's in that task table. Once we have access to it, we'll save it in a variable and then print that out to the console. Let's save this up, go to our terminal and run it. Make sure you're in your workspace and your workspace is activated before you run your file. This will ensure that your Python script will have access to all the different modules it needs. All right, here's our data. It's mixed in with a few SQL statements, but we should be able to pluck it out. This is the first piece of data we printed out. We were selecting our organized closet project, and that's what we get here in the console. For our tasks, we have all 3 tasks right here printed to the console. It did that select statement, which we see here, retrieved that data, and then we printed it out to the console. Now, for a lot of the stuff that we've done here, we could encapsulate functionality out into separate, reusable, and parameterized functions like we did in the last lesson, and continue to make this more Pythonic. For a lot of the stuff we've done here, we could encapsulate the functionality out into separate, reusable, and parameterized functions, just like we did in the last lesson. We could continue to make this more Pythonic. We have hard-coded a lot of stuff, including our username and password, which you should never do in production. This should be in a configuration file, but this is a good start for using SQLAlchemy with your MySQL database.